And this is how we got to Wessel at Grow South Africa. We went to Old Mutual, Quisnell, spoke to Chris Hart from Impact Investments, and a number of other partners. And currently we are busy to pursue 3 tracks. The one is we are trying to set up a cooperative bank with some foreign partners, bank which can belong to producers themselves. We are trying to bring forward buying into the fry, where farmers' harvests of 2022 can already be bought this year so that they can be accessed to inputs. And then, of course, we found Chris and Wessel and Kevin to assist us on something like this S12J. And hence, we partnered up to organize the webinar today. This is going beyond advocacy. This is about taking some action to see how one can pool resources in order to fill the gap which Land Bank has left. And thank you so much to you, Wessel and Kevin and Quisnell, and of course, Chris Hart. Thank you to all of you who have linked on to this webinar today. And let's see if we can join forces to do something great for agriculture this year.
Thank you, Theo. We really look forward to this. You know, since we started with the diversified agriculture, we basically started only in February, and we've already got 15 investors with 27.5 million rand raised. So just imagine what we can do if we can all work together. Dani, are you available? Can you share with us from just what are the opportunities that diversified agriculture offers?
Thank you, Wessel, and thank you for the opportunity just to share some thoughts on this. And I think it's a very good place to sort of start talking about agriculture and the role that agriculture plays. So I think Dr. De Jager is quite correct, and I think it's it's very starkly illustrated if you just have a look at the sort of economic performance of the different sectors. You'll see that agriculture has really performed very well in these very difficult times. So not to oversimplify it, I think the important thing just to take, or the message that I think one should take home from that is that besides the fact that it's not a good investment, I think the key message from me there is that sorry, Wessel, there's a lot of I think so just to carry on, I think the important
can we just ask
agriculture and the opportunity there.
Sorry, can we ask everyone just to mute? Okay, it sounds better. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry for that. So I think the important thing just with agriculture is that the fact that it performs well, is one element should consider. But I think an equally important factor is that we need to understand why it's performing so well. And I think that's quite critical looking at it from an investment point of view. So I think the key for me is that agriculture is quite a resilient sector in the South African economy, and I think because obviously people are very reliant on our whole system of supply, basically from farmers and the guys that supply those inputs to them, right through to the processors and the retailers that make food available in the retail shop. So most people in the country are basically dependent on a system to basically on a system to get food on their table. And given the fact that you've got this strong system, means that there is an opportunity in a way to be invested in this process of actually bringing food from farms right through to the consumer's plate. And I think the fact that agriculture has performed so well, it tells us something about the resilience of the sector in the one sense, and the potential that lies in this. So I think that's one important issue to think about, and the fact that we all know, and I think it's quite well known, is the strength of the agricultural sector in that regard. I think another important issue to keep in mind is that there are sort of two aspects to it. On the one end, if you're an investor and you buy the whole thesis or the rationale for being invested in agriculture, then it's quite challenging to be invested or to find mechanisms or tools to invest in agriculture. So either you have to do a very direct investment where you either purchase a place for yourself, or you find some share, where you share maybe a property with somebody else in some other way in the agricultural sector. And I think what this opportunity with the 12J investments does is that it provides a tool or a mechanism which is a little bit easier to be invested. So if you buy the thesis that agriculture is a good investment, then a tool like this makes it a whole lot easier for you to be invested. And the nice thing about it is that it allows you to invest in these smaller and medium scale businesses, which are not, those investments are not readily available through any other mechanisms. So I think that's quite a nice tool or mechanism that becomes possible if one looks at it from that perspective, in terms of getting access to the sector and investments in the sector. So I think that's an important point I just wanted to raise in that. And the nice thing is also that if we buy the whole philosophy of a portfolio, also what an investment like this does, it allows you to do an investment in a portfolio of projects or a portfolio of opportunities. So again, you can be invested in a meat farming business in the one end and a processing business on the other end, and it stretches across multiple sectors. So I think it's maybe vegetables, fruit, nuts, maybe. So I think again the possibilities in terms of spreading one's risk in this sort of investment is quite healthy, because of the fact you've got this the scope to be invested in a diversity of sectors within the agricultural basket, if you want. And that again, if we buy the idea that you need to be diversified, this allows you that opportunity to be diversified in this sort of broad sector. And the same goes for the fact that it allows you this opportunity to be invested in the primary sector, where primary production takes place, sheep farming or cattle farming or farming with vegetables or nuts, right through to processing. So taking it all through to where farmers are producing a final product, or some processing enterprise again is produced. Again, the key for me is that it allows you this diversity. And we know again from the portfolio concept that if you have a portfolio like this, it spreads your risk, which again makes it possible to manage some of the exposure that one might have to the one or other sector. So in other words, if you're just a livestock farmer, you are very exposed to drought. But if you've got a portfolio like this, and you're invested in a portfolio of agricultural sectors, then your exposure is not all that high. So again, I think it's a good tool, or a handy tool to be able to get invested into this. And at the same time, it allows you the exposure to the broad sector. And I think the last point I just wanted to make, and I think again that's what Dr. De Jager has pointed out, is that the advances in the agricultural sector have also meant that finance has become an important catalyst for these sorts of investments. And I think this, to take it a step further, is not just the fact that we need finance from the financiers like the land bank and the commercial banks, the thing is that agriculture has actually become quite capital intensive. So if you think about quite a sizable feedlot, for example, it requires hundreds of millions of rands, or sometimes I would even guess it might even approach R1 billion worth of capital to have a system that's running. And it's just the nature of it in some way. And I think, again, this speaks to Dr. Diage's concepts about how do you make sure that a family farm is able to raise that sort of capital to be able to be in a position to still be competitive in the market. And this is, again, where it comes into. So I think the farmers and the role players in the whole agricultural value chain have to start looking at new sources of funding, and sources of funding that have got different horizons, that it's not just a short-term horizon maybe, but a longer-term horizon, and that have got different expectations. So it's not that you are expecting a repayment in maybe after the production cycle, but maybe it's a little bit more patient. And I think that's quite important to also understand from an agricultural point of view, is that that this sort of investment, or the tool that it creates a new opportunity for the stakeholders in this value chain to access sources of funding that are currently maybe challenging for them to access, and or that it's just overall difficult or too expensive for them to do. But I think that's important to reiterate the fact that the very capital intensive nature of agriculture has necessitated a big drive to make sure that you've got sustainable sources of funding. And again, as I say, this is an important stopgap that can be filled by a tool like these 12J investments. So I think in broad terms, I think this sort of sketches the opportunity, and I think the need for these sorts of investments in the agricultural sector. I think it speaks to the philosophy of impact investment, in the sense that these sorts of investments will make an impact in the agricultural sector for the sector itself, and it can also gain some value for the investors. So I think it's a sort of a win-win situation, and I think it addresses many of the challenges that the agricultural sector sits with at the moment on the one hand, and then also the investors that are looking for alternatives, alternative sources of investment. So I think those are just my broad ideas, and yeah, I'm happy to discuss this some more with anybody that's interested. Thank you.
Sorry, now I struggle with technology. Thank you, Dani. We really appreciate your input. I'm just going to share a few things. I hope everyone can hear clearly now. Sounds like it. Just to add to what Dani is saying, we are so excited because the one thing that we realized is that if we all work together, especially work with Agri All Africa and SAI and ourselves, GrowSA and Impact Investment Africa, we can just achieve so much more. And it opens up opportunities as well from impact investment funds internationally. So obviously, when we started off, we had this dream. And I'm going to run through these slides very quickly. What do we want to achieve? We want to redeem the rural economy. And I think we all know that our small towns are suffering at present. And we would like to redeem that economies. We would like to restore the rural towns and support good principles, provide food from the gate to the plate, establishing farm factories to add value to the raw commodities, provide good, healthy, wholesome food, organic with no growth hormones and genetically modified crops, and help the farmers to receive their fair share of the income generated by the value chain. So that's our dream. And our focus areas is really to focus on high value products such as blueberries, moringa, saffron, etc., preferably existing projects with a proven track record that can be taken to the next level and that has the ability to support outgrowers so that we can bring more people into the fold. Projects that can add value to the producer, such as value add factory farming and technology in agriculture. We realize that 12J is very patient money and that we need to supplement it. So we need to raise 12J, plus we are looking at international impact investment funds, DFI funding, and to ultimately unlock pension funds. But that is far in the future. What we need to do at this point of time is to build up a group of projects that can show to the world that we can do it in South Africa and Southern Africa. And hopefully, as Stu said, at the end of the day, to encourage cooperative banking where we can all plow back into this initiative. I'm going to hand over because the most important person is Chris, that's going to talk about how do we use 12J effectively to do all what we want to do. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to hand over to Chris and Dave so that they can share with us. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Wessel. Again, appreciation. And I hope you find this interesting. That's a case of how do we prosper through taxes. And it's always an interesting thing because to say we prosper through taxes is strange because taxes usually make us poor and poorer. But that is what we're going to actually talk about today. But first, we're going to talk about the disclaimer. And basically, it's a standard thing with financial services. We have to at least reflect what this presentation is about and what it isn't. It's it's not investment advice, but mainly an information session. And taking any action on this, one needs to be under the consultation of an advisor. But what I want to talk about is firstly, Section 12J of the Income Tax Act. And I've specified of the Income Tax Act because very often the response I get for 12J is that, oh no, this sounds to be too good to be true. Or what happens if we upset SARS and all the rest of it? And basically it is part of the Tax Act. Okay, it's embedded in the SARS e-filing. For people who have already done the 12J with us, they submit their investment online, it calculates it, and suddenly you've got an enormous return that comes through from that. That's been around already for 12 years. It does not come as a surprise to SARS, and we can fund small, medium enterprises, startups. We can, if there's companies that need to be recapitalized, that can also happen. If there's companies that need money for growth, same thing, and it's patient capital. I would emphasize it's a mechanism. The mechanism is a tax deduction. It works exactly like a retirement annuity. If you were putting that, you do a retirement annuity, it gives you a deduction off your income. And that's how the actual benefit works. So if we take an example of an investor that invests R1 million into a Section 12J venture capital company, and that's a normal company that's just got SARS's blessing on to be able to issue a Section 12J share certificate. The company that we're talking about now is Impact Empowerment Ventures. You invest in R1 million, and that means you get an investment in that thing, and you can then get a refund. And for individuals, it will range between 300,000 Rand to 450,000 Rand. Effectively, that means your investment of R1 million has cost you 300,000, or sorry, it's cost you 700,000 or 550,000. It depends on the level of the tax refund. If you don't do this investment, your money stays with SARS. It never ever comes back. So this is one thing when people, the first thing I get is that people short circuit upstairs. They can't believe that SARS will allow you to actually get your taxes back and apply it to an investment. And it's a permanent, when they give your taxes back, it's a permanent, uh, return of your taxes. You don't have to pay those taxes again as long as you've invested for 5 years. And when you exit the investment, and you don't need to exit after 5 years, you can carry on investing. After 5 years, you would pay capital gains tax on whatever you get out. And that's basically how it works. The minimum investment is R1 million. Maximum investment is 2.5 million rand. Those are for individuals and for trusts. For companies, the maximum is 5 million. So that's basically how it works. It's really a very, very simple mechanism. It's just gives you make the investment, and it's a simple deduction off your income for income tax purposes, and it lowers the cost of that investment. So you make R1 million, you get R1 million worth of investment, but it only costs you maybe 600,000 rand. What are we trying to achieve as an impact investing house? Is firstly, if we have a look at hierarchy of needs, if you look at impact investing in offshore, it's mainly aimed at what I call the top of the needs pyramid, where it's green energy, environmental stuff, etc. But I believe to be Africa relevant, the environment means nothing to people who don't have jobs, food, or houses. So we are looking at targeting the base of the pyramid, basically to help create jobs, to help improve and secure housing, food security, education, but also business ownership. We try to fund people into their businesses, not out of their businesses. And we summarize this with what I call our enrich formula, which basically stands for enhanced risk controlled returns. In other words, we want to give investors returns on the income by controlling risk, right? And we generate investment that creates change and hope. And that's where the job creation comes in. Basically securing people's lives at the base of that needs pyramid. But it's important, although it's impact investing, we do believe from a sustainability point of view, profitability is in fact sacrosanct. Almost projects must have commercial merit as a starting off point. This is not charities. There's space for charities in this world, but not this. This is investor money that we're talking about, and we need to actually have commercial merit. And next to that, we evaluate the people, good people. And that's why education and training is such an important part of our impact investing philosophy. We also look at risk. Don't want to run away from risk, but actually to identify, to look risk in the face, and actually use risk as a means to actually improve, the prospect of success through managing and mitigating the risk. And then also technology. The fourth industrial revolution is not just about the internet. It's the explosion of technology that we're seeing in terms of, in agriculture, it's just phenomenal in terms of the type of productivity gains that we can do with technology. And there's a whole lot of stuff that we could actually talk about with technology that's beyond the scope of this particular presentation. But let's have a look at section 12J. And we say if you invest R1 million, it creates R1 million deduction off your taxable income. That's what we found at Impact Empowerment Ventures, is that people don't have the R1 million to invest. So they cannot access the Section 12J investment. And that's what we found is the biggest barrier to entry. So how do we do it? We structure it in a way that we can actually use people's taxes, but actually expose them to to minimize the risk. So the first thing is that instead of trying to find the R1 million, and I'm going to use a R1 million example, but it can go up to 2.5 million rand, not a problem for investors, or 5 million rand for companies. But what happens is that we use Impact Cash Management Fund, and we then write a loan for the investor. And that loan then gets applied to the investment. And that's what generates the tax refund. By making the loan creates the investment, and the investment then generates the actual tax refund. And that tax refund goes back to paying down the loan, because SARS says if you may borrow money for 12 years as long as it gets paid off and that you're at risk for the actual investment. So that's basically what we do, and then the investment is then available for the qualifying company. And it's important that the investment itself collateralizes the loan. So we do a limited collateral loan, which helps to contain the risk. And then we also don't take the risk on the loan portion before it actually hits the qualifying company. The qualifying company then takes the risk for the loan. And so if I could go through this particular structure just a little bit slower, is that we by making the investment, we generate a 1 million rand asset. That generates the refund, which means that instead of a 1 million rand loan, the refund actually helps to pay down the loan, which is part of what SARS requires from the regulation point of view to comply with the regulation. We also ask because if we don't do this, it helps with the compliance. We ask investors to put down a securing deposit, which is not part of the investment. It's part of the collateral of the investment. Because remember, we're doing a limited collateral investment. In other words, we define the collateral in the loan agreement, and we cannot go after anything more. So we define the securing deposit, we define the actual share certificate as the collateral. And already, as you can see in this example, you're doing a 1,025,000 rand that is securing a 600,000 rand loan effectively. And we believe that is sufficient from our risk point of view. But we write that loan as a zero interest rate loan because we haven't taken any risk on the loan. I call it the loan is not monetized at this point. What then happens? We pass this whole lot onto a qualifying investment, which would be the agricultural projects that we're looking at. And that then gets passed on. And at that point, we actually collateralize or monetize the 600,000 rand residual loan there. And that gets done inside the qualifying investment. So the qualifying investment, the qualifying company actually services the loan. They pay the interest on behalf of the investor when we refinance the loan in the qualifying investment as such. And that means the investor is enjoying the upside, but we've actually taken a lot of the risk of the downside away. What then happens? What we're trying to do over the next 5 years, because the investment needs to stay for 5 years, is that we are now taking that contribution that the taxpayer made, and we're trying to turn it in, get a return on that. Let's say, for instance, if we get 15% a year, we would return something like, if you gave us 400,000 in taxes, we will be able to return 800,000 in 5 years' time. That is net of the debt, right? And that's basically what it is. So coming back to the mechanism that I presented previously, what we've effectively done is allowed the investor to actually access the investment, and effectively the only thing that they're really putting down is the securing deposit, which is what we're trying to limit the downside to, and their taxes. And we've literally just flipping people's taxes into the investment. So instead of paying your taxes to SARS, who then pass it on to the Guptas or whatever they do with it, we can now actually apply it to something that actually creates jobs, food security, etc. How do we access this investment? And the basic, it's quite simple. We sign the commitment to invest. We then populate the various forms that need to be done. We get the securing deposit in place, and then we then supply the required documentation to be completed. It's the FICA, the FICE, the loan agreement, the investment agreement. All of those documents then need to be done, and then you email it to 12j@impactinafrica.com. Who can invest? Companies, trusts, individuals, provisional taxpayers. If you don't have enough in income for R1 million, we can put you into partnerships to put you over that 1 million rand minimum threshold, and basically that allows you to actually access this investment. So I'd like to say thank you very much, and leave it at that. Please look at the actions. We will also contact you over the next few days to find out any questions, etc. And I'll hand back to Wessel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay.
Our time is almost done, but if you have burning questions, please just reconnect, go to the same, just go to the same link. Just give me 2 minutes time, and then we will answer all questions. Thank you for participating. We really appreciate you all, and we look forward to your investments. Thanks, Chris.
Wessel, if I could just come in quickly before we cut off, and to say what Chris perhaps omitted to tell us all,